Alright, so the next step on the 2012 Hyundai Veloster is to drain the coolant so we can replace the thermostat and the water pump. Car has 22,000 miles on it. It's never been done, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, next step is to locate the petcock valve on the Veloster, and on the first gen, if you look here, you've got these three little holes, and right here, the one that's sort of center, you don't know if you can see it, it's kind of black, but right where my finger's wiggling, right next to the intercooler, is a small black screw, plastic screw, and you can reach up there and turn that, and that's what we're going to loosen up to start the drain, and it should come through this hole more or less. Get yourself some catch pans, and then that way you can dispose of your coolant properly. Alright, remember, righty tighty, lefty loosey. It may be stuck in there, so remember it's plastic, so don't get too carried away. Now it's starting to spin. Alright, and back in a bit when that's drained. Alright, so it looks like the 4 bolts on the front of the water pump are 10s. Alright, and just like that, 4 10s. It's real easy to get from the bottom. I used one of these ratchety 10s, and it came right off, and I didn't even loosen the tension on the belt. Let's take a look at this guy. This belt doesn't look too bad. I don't see any cracking in it. Alright, so the more I look at it, probably the easiest option, just to give myself a little bit better room, is to go ahead and pull the alternator. It's only held in by these 2 bolts at the top, so, and one on the bottom, and then this whole alternator bracket and everything will come up out of the way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to pull those 3 bolts and get the alternator up out of the way for now. Alright, so your 2 bolts at the top are 12. There's a long one and a short one. The long one goes on the top, the short one goes on the bottom. And your bottom alternator bracket bolt is a 14. And it takes a minute to get out of there. Alright, so with the alternator out of the way, you can easily get to the pump. My alternator was a capital B-Otch to get out. Alright, there's our part number for, oops, can you see that? Part number for our new water pump. Got this from Rock Auto. There's our old one, and it doesn't seem to be in too bad a shape. It's not loose and not rattling. It wasn't leaking, but like I said, this car has 122,000 miles on it, so gonna change it. One thing I do notice is that bearing housing is a lot smaller on the old one compared to the new one. So hopefully that makes this last longer. Alright, so next thing we got to do is get the old gasket out of there, put the new gasket on, and put the bolts back in. And I was wrong, it's 5 bolts, not 4, they are 10s. Alright, so a little bit of finessing and a little bit of wiggling, and the new pump is in, new gasket, and the bolts are started but not started to get tight yet. So next we're going to go ahead and tighten them down and then torque them to 15 foot-pounds. Okay, so water pump is all the way torqued down. Now we're going to get that pulley out. Here's our new pulley. Again, this is a part from Rock Auto. I'm using a long 14. I've already broke it loose. So we should be able to just pull that right out of there. Alright, here's our old one. The bearing was actually still in pretty decent shape. It hadn't started to fail or make any noise. You do have to transfer your bolt over. It is just literally this rubber piece here, and then it just pops back in like that, and it's ready to go back in. Yeah, it doesn't look like the pulley is any different. Doesn't matter which side is in, as long as you have the washer and the bolt back in, you should be good to go. Alright, pulley back in and tighten down. Can't really get my torque wrench in there, so the good old-fashioned German good and tight will be what you're going to go for. You just want to make sure that the pulley spins, and it does, and that's that. So I'm going to clean up the alternator a little bit, make sure it slides back in. Then I will go ahead and put that in. But I'm going to go ahead and put the pulley on the water pump while I have it out, and with the alternator out, it'll be a little easier to get those bolts back in. You can do it from the bottom, it's fairly easy, but since I have the top out, I'll go ahead and do it from up here. Alright, 4 bolts are back on and tightened down, pulley is on. First one was always a pain in the butt. Once I got it started, I could get the other 3. I've tightened them down as tight as I can, just holding the pulley. Once I get the belt back on, I'll go ahead and put a little bit more pressure on them. Alright, so alternator's back in. I took a file to the edges of the mounting surface and just cleaned them up, and it slips right in. Plugged the AC compressor back in, alternator's plugged back in, and I believe that is your front bank cam adjuster dealy bumper. That's this one, so I plugged all those back in. So the only thing left on this side we have to do is put the belt on, and here's our new belt. That's our part number. Again, got this from Rock Auto. Okay, belt's back on. Now we can put the adjuster back on. If you try to put the belt on with the adjuster on, you're in for a hell of a day. Even fully on like it's supposed to be, it's still very, very difficult to put on. Takes a little bit of finessing. I suggest leaving the belt in the sun while you're working. That way it'll stretch out a little bit. Be easier to put on. Alright, retorque your 212s here. The next thing you'll do is adjust your belt and then tighten this bolt down. I leave about 1 inch of play or so. I'll adjust it a little bit after it's run. Don't forget to tighten down that 14 bolt that's on the bottom of the alternator. If you rely strictly on this bolt here, you will snap this. I've seen these just because the alternator basically saws the bolt right in half. So always make sure that bottom one's tight, because that's the one that's actually doing anything. This one is primarily just to adjust and tighten that belt. So, alright, so I didn't record this because it was kind of a pain. So your thermostat on these Velosters is actually under your alternator. If you follow this radiator hose to the block, that's where it's at. So you basically, when you take the alternator out to do your pump, you should go ahead and replace that thermostat as well. Okay, so we filled the reservoir and everything up with the proper coolant. I just topped off with a little water because it stopped taking any, and so I just want to make sure there's no air bubbles. So there's just a little bit of water that I added to some 50-50 mix. I tightened the water pump bolts down now before I started it. I've let it warm completely up. It has bubbled and gurped a few times, but other than that, it looks like it might be full of coolant. So I'm just letting it run for about another 15 minutes, and then I'm going to shut it off, let it cool down, see how much fluid it takes in, if any, and then I'll disconnect and be ready to go. Little side note, I threw my poor man's cold air intake on here, basically just a filter big enough to fit over the housing, and there you go.